general elections of September 2020. Comrades sent in postmortems and suggestions as to the way forward following that election defeat. Elections in which it was clear that the party had been abandoned by Jamaican voters. It was not so much a victory of the JLP because they got less votes than they got the time before, but the PNP did even worse, receiving only 16% support from Jamaica's electorate, which was even lower than the party received in that first universal suffrage elections of 1944. So after racking our brains and reflecting, we came up with the answer that what we needed to do, what the party needs to do, is to recommit ourselves to a reform of the two-level economy, the economy of haves and the have-nots in Jamaica, which has got even worse, in our view, than it was 50 years ago. And in our view, we thought two kinds of actions were needed. And this is, I'm now giving an outline of the Progressive Manifesto, not an outline, but a synopsis of the Progressive Manifesto. We thought that the first kind of action needed was reform of the party itself, within the party, and secondly, a government program that the party should put together, a basic program of government that it would be prepared to implement once it returns to power. A program aimed primarily at reducing the gap between the haves and the have-nots in Jamaica. We first had discussions amongst ourselves for several weeks, months, and refined our ideas, expanded some of them further, and we are now at a point where we are now discussing our proposals topic by topic. This is actually, firstly, we had a number of discussions, 2 or 3 discussions on the party proposals, the main points of which are that firstly, there needs to be a differentiation between members and supporters in the party, in which the responsibility of members is made clear as distinct from those who are merely supporters. Also that there should be a probation period for membership in the party and also for office holding within the party. Very importantly, we think that the party needs to implement a realistic subscription that is in proportion to the income levels of the members. And final area has to do with policy, that there should be much more policy discussion within the party, starting with annual regional conventions devoted solely to party discussion. And so we have moved from the party side to the general government proposals, and this is the 6th in the series. We started with energy, where in our view, it is necessary and possible for the government, a future PNP government, to eliminate Jamaica's chronic foreign exchange deficit by switching from our dependence on petroleum, switching mainly to solar energy over a 5-year period. In that regard, that government should give loan guarantees to householders to set up domestic solar generators and to use the foreign exchange savings from this new energy program to set up a sovereign wealth fund that would lead toward renewed investment in industrial development, and at the same time would lead to an increase in the value of the Jamaican dollar. Next up was a discussion on tourism, where we're saying that tourism, Jamaican tourism, should serve Jamaicans first, that we need to remove the practical barriers to access to our beaches in spite of the laws. We need to have practical measures such as mandating easements between the properties that the public can get access to the beach. That we should diversify tourism away from the resort areas. That certain tourism services should be reserved for Jamaicans, for example, transportation and entertainment, and that we should integrate more and more tourism into the Jamaican economy. We move then to education. What we're saying in this regard is that a Jamaican government of today needs to put the emphasis now at the primary level, that we need to upgrade our primary schools to at least the level of our best preparatory schools, and that we should seek to integrate primary and preparatory schools, that we should redesign the primary level curriculum to make it serve national development goals, goals of democracy, social justice, national pride, community solidarity, law and order, and national development. Next, we discussed agriculture, and our proposals are aimed at modernizing agriculture to drive rural development. That in that regard, it is essential that we have a change in the perception of how we see agriculture, that agriculture should be seen as embracing all aspects of the food industry, including processing, that we should promote new style agricultural cooperatives as a solution to small farmers' main problems. And for this to become a reality, however, we need certain legal changes. In particular, we need to change the Cooperative Societies Act so that it facilitates greater investment in cooperatives, and also the Community Councils Act would help in helping to diversify ownership. The last discussion we had was on affordable housing and urban upgrading. A comprehensive set of proposals, but the main ones have to do with, firstly, that the government should aim to keep mortgage and rental payments below 30% of a family's monthly income. That's what we regard as affordable housing. That private builders of housing schemes should be required to reserve about 30% of their units for middle and low income earners. And for those housing schemes built by government, supposedly as affordable housing, the government should offer up to 15% of such units to upper income buyers. And all of this is in an aim to reverse residential segregation. Furthermore, we are recommending that at the low income level, government should introduce schemes to give down payment assistance for the poorest people. That where rental is concerned, the Ministry of Housing should introduce a register of rentals to which landlords would be required to submit their intentions regarding changes of their relations with their tenants. And finally, regarding urban upgrading, what we're saying is that local residents need to be consulted when government is contemplating urban renewal or urban upgrading, and particularly that the residents in the area should have priority in the allocation of the new units that are constructed in these areas. This evening we move to the subject of workers' rights and company governance, on which we have some we think important proposals. And give the presentation this evening will be James Walsh, who is the former principal of Brownstown Community College. He's also a former member of the leadership team of the People's National Party's youth organization. And therefore, without further ado, I pass the microphone over to James. Workers' rights and company governance.
Thank you. I think I'm to do the introduction, but thank you for starting it. So, for some of us who may not know James very well, he may seem very unassuming, but James is someone that Jamaicans will say silent river run deep. Personally, I've always regarded James as an undercover Marxist in the People's National Party and the PNPYO. I don't believe he read Marxism-Leninism, but I don't think he'd ever describe himself as a Marxist-Leninist in the true sense. But he certainly took a long and world view of the politics. And that's why he built a very tight cell that never grew much, was never infiltrated, called the St. Anne PNPYO. James is a successful educator, principal of the Brownstown Community College for many years, and I'm told built an excellent relationship with the student and the teacher body. Someone who has people skills, very down to earth, no pretenses, but someone who is an intellectual in every sense of the word. He was chairman and is chairman for Northeast St. Anne constituency for many years. And as Leroy has said, he has been actively involved in the whole development of the Progressive Manifesto. It is my pleasure to introduce, notwithstanding Leroy's initial one, and welcome James to the platform. So,
thank you. Thank you very much, Comrade Burke, Comrade Leroy. Good evening and good morning, comrades. I know for Comrade Duncan Thompson, it's morning. It's another honor to be here. I'm sorry I've missed some of the things. For a man who has nothing to do, I've found that things just pop up unexpectedly and you have to do them, you know. So I have not been as consistent as I was earlier, but I will try without refusing to do things that people ask me. I'll try to be a better participant in this thing, which I believe is very important. The more I've been thinking about this thing, I mean, you know, in terms of the situation in Jamaica, the situation in the world, but of course our primary concern right now is Jamaica. And like Comrade Burke and some others, I'm actually involved on a regular basis in underground politics. You know, it's been a constituency chairman and trying to resurrect what was once a great PNP constituency has now become a JLP bastion. So, you know, that takes some time, but it exposes me to many experiences that we need to reflect on. But to turn to the topic, the workers' rights and worker and company governance, which is one of the central things that we looked at in trying to come up with the Progressive Manifesto. Now, when we look at the history of Jamaica, of course, and I say the history, in the technical sense of the period in which they have been writing. The prehistory being the period, of course, when the Tainos and others were here, but history starting with Columbus and more so accelerated and accentuated by the British is one of brutal exploitation of the working people. Right? First in slavery, which of course was the most brutal form, and it continued in the post-emancipation period, where the workers had very few rights, and the working people in general were marginalized in legal terms and in terms of access to rights and privileges. Right? Now, there was some improvement in the rights situation, but this improvement was wrestled from the colonial powers and the local authorities by struggle, in the form of protests and upheaval, then later on trade union action and political action. Right? That so over time between 1840, 1838 and the present, there was a lot of upheaval, plenty struggles where we tried to expand the rights of workers in Jamaica. Now, the main strides in the improvement of working conditions and workers' rights, of course, came after the introduction of adult suffrage. And most notably, in my mind, in the 1970s, when the Michael Manley government, which had proclaimed democratic socialism, did an immense, put an immense effort into bringing about improvements in the conditions and the terms and the rights of the working people, introducing holidays with pay in some instances, equal pay for equal work, a minimum wage, protections, redundancy payments, protection from unjust dismissal, various other forms of things. So that there were significant improvements throughout time, but more so in the 70s. Now, with the advent of neoliberalism in the late 70s, early 80s, and since then we have seen an erosion of the rights of the workers, an erosion that manifests itself quite prominently in Jamaica in terms of the wide-scale use of the contract system. That is where persons who were previously regarded as employees and had various benefits in terms of leave and pensions and so on and health care and all that. These persons were made redundant in many cases, or when they're employed as contract workers, which is a kind of pseudo self-employment where they are responsible for themselves, for the insurance, etc. And they are treated as self-employed by law. They are not able to go into unions, etc. And very importantly, this individualizes them. It is an obstacle to the collective, the solidarity that has always been the source of strength of the working class. That, as pitted against the capitalists or the employer one-on-one, they are no match. It is only by combining that they have some kind of, that they are able to mobilize enough power to have some influence and improve their situation. And of course, that is why capital has always sought to prevent the combination of workers. Now, this contract system, and it's widely used in Jamaica. I'm not so sure how many of us are aware of it, but on the ground, in the hotels, in the banks, many factories, the people usually used to be permanent employees, as they call them, or employees, where their condition has been changed and they now go into contracts, right? And usually it's relatively short-term contracts. And this is a mechanism by which their terms of employment are worsened, meaning that they get less pay, and less benefits. Now, one of the first proposals that came up from our group is that when the PNP comes to power, but before that we would still agitate, that there be legislation to clarify the distinction between employees and independent contractors. Right? Possibly doing this by limiting the number of contractors at any one that a company can employ at any one time, or that is the number of persons classified as contractors who are actually in substance employees, but in law contractors. That we try to limit that by law, so that there can only be a certain number at any one time or a certain percentage of the workforce. And also, secondly, establishing a minimum contract duration, for example, a year. Because some of these contracts are month contract, 3-month contracts are quite popular, etc. Now, just to say this is a matter of significance because of the large-scale use of this in the security industry by the security guards, in tourism for the line workers, in the bauxite, and in the banks, where over the last 10, 15 years, if you go into a bank now, 90 to 95%, I suspect, of the workers are on contracts. Right? So this is something that has impacted a significant proportion of our workforce. It has, of course, one of the features of the neoliberal age is what they call precarious employment, or precarity, as some call it. And the contracts are one of the ways that the precarity is enforced. So that's one proposal. Right? We also, another suggestion is that in law we specify persons who perform certain tasks, for example, like security guards, are automatically and legally classified as employees. It's as if you say that that's not open to contract employment, because some of the greatest abuses, of course, have taken place in the security industry, which, as we realize, with the explosion of insecurity in Jamaica, we have had an explosion of security operations. Comrade Burke knows a lot about that too, on the good side. The other issue of company governance, right? Now, as I think all of us here just going through, have some experience of the 70s. And we know that one of the things we struggled for then was to have worker participation, both in terms of the management of the enterprises and in terms of the ownership of the enterprises, right? Now that, of course, with the advent of neoliberalism has largely fallen by the wayside. Now, one of our main proposals is that the government mandates participation of workers in the governance of large profit-making enterprises. So, by law, it mandates that large, and of course we haven't necessarily precisely defined large, that these profit-making enterprises are compelled to have workers involved in their, at the management level, certainly at the board level. The plan is to hold discussions with the unions, or the proposal, to arrive at some consensus about which model of worker involvement is to be utilized. And secondly, the extent of worker power that is desired. In our discussions, we looked at, and we are suggesting the study of the experience of Germany, Scandinavian countries, and Austria as examples where there are different degrees of work and forms of worker participation in industries. Large and medium size, and not so much small. But in other words, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, we would look at the existing models and see how they have worked, and to try and assess their applicability to our situation. Yeah. In terms of another initial proposal is that workers be represented on the boards of all the listed companies. That is, all companies listed on the stock exchange. That's one. And two, that all companies employing more than 200 workers also, so that from the beginning, they would have to have workers on their board or employees on their board. Right? Now, for the largest companies, the suggestion is that at least a third of the seats on the board be worker held. It is also thought that government should have representation on the boards of entities that it considers strategic. Yes, we're looking at the utilities and certain exports and key industries and enterprises, etc. That the government should also have some representation on the board representing the broader national interests. Another key element that we looked at is a democratization of ownership. So we're not just talking about the management or the governance or control in the kind of political legal sense, but the democratization of the ownership of large corporations. This is seen as especially imperative now in light of the increasing, or I should say the accelerating decline in worker protections in Jamaica. Including in this, we see the increased importation of labor, even where adequate local supply is available. As you know, since independence and maybe even before, we have had work permits, because what they've tried to do is to, give an advantage to local workers to counteract, as you know, in the past, I'm assuming, but as many of us know, in the past, under colonialism, the best jobs were reserved for people from outside, and in many cases also for people of a certain hue. But since independence, we have tried to give an advantage to local labor by saying, no, if the labor exists in Jamaica with the requisite skill, capabilities, then it should go to them. They should be employed. It's only when there is a deficit in that, where there are skills that are not present in adequate quantities locally, we should then import skilled labor, as such. Now, my experience, certainly in the area in which I operate, is that in tourism in particular, that has been grossly violated. I saw recently there was a construction work on a hotel, and interestingly, some among the labor imported was what we would call casual labor. People who, as far as we could see, were doing the work that in Jamaica you get unskilled labor to do. It wasn't, as they told us initially, that, we need certain kind of tilers because, the Spanish people in particular, they have certain tiles that we don't have here, and they need tilers and people like that. That they need plumbers and industrial plumbers, because most of our plumbers are not really industrial plumbers. But my observation in at least one major construction, which some of our comrades were involved, is that the people of all types of skilled or unskilled were brought in and put to work. Now, I know there is a tendency, they've been pointing fingers at the Chinese and said the Chinese have done that too. I don't have a lot of experience with the Chinese in terms of that, although I've observed one of their projects in this area. But so I can't really speak to that, but I can speak to in tourism where that is so. And one of the things we have found too, and this of course now touches on middle class people, that with the advent or the acceleration, the increase or the pervasiveness of globalization, jobs that previously would have been available to locals in the managerial level, say in the hotels, in the banks, etc., are now often filled, and the bauxite companies are now often filled by persons from abroad, right? Of course, under the guise that here, these are multinational corporations and they move their staff around, you know, and so it is no longer seen as the kind of in thing to have local people take up all these positions. They're saying, no, no, it's a multinational thing. Now, from what we have seen so far, unfortunately, um, not many of our people seem to get to go away to the other branches overseas and hold managerial positions. But many people in the like accountants and various specialist managers, usually outside of HR, are replaced, right? And the positions are held by people brought in from the head office or from somewhere else. A lot of the people here, for example, are from the Dominican Republic. In one of the hotels, people are from Mexico, others from Spain. And you understand that, you know, they need a certain proportion of the workforce to have that experience to preserve what or enable them to have what we call a flavor. You know, so the hotel will have a Spanish or a Mexican flavor. But this is something where, as you would understand, because it is kind of imprecise, could always smuggle in a few, you know, the numbers are difficult to determine and to live. So those are some of our proposals. That's the basic thing we are struggling against. And these are our proposals in terms of trying to combat the erosion of workers' rights that has been taking place, instituting measures to combat this, and hopefully to even expand workers' rights in the future, and to ensure that the workers have a say in governance, that the boards and the works councils and so on have representation so that the workers can bring their insights and their interests to bear on the operations of the organization. And finally, of course, to participate in terms of ownership by purchasing shares or having shares allocated to them, various measures that we will explore. I think Comrade Cook actually was involved with the ESOP at one point in time. And that is something we looked at and we believe should be explored again as part of the measures that we are going to put in place when we return to power to augment and the status and to improve the condition and experience of the working class. I just closing up, because if you look at it, we're talking a lot about employees and so on. And well, you know that one of the characteristics of the neoliberal age, as I said, is the expansion of individualized employment and precarious employment. And that's, I don't recall us actually tackling that in our discussions in a frontal way. By speaking about contract labor, we did address one of it, but clearly there are forces at work that drive this. And I don't think we gave that the depth of analysis that we would normally try to apply to things like these. Those are my few words, well, more than a few words, trying to present a synopsis of what we are proposing in terms of workers' rights and company governance.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Let me, before we go in much further, let me just explain our protocol. If you wish to participate in the discussion, whether by asking a question, making a suggestion, or whatever, and if you are not familiar with the Zoom platform, what you do is, if you look at the bottom, if you move your cursor to the bottom of your screen and look at to the right-hand side, at the bottom, you will see something, a thing marked reactions. And if you press that reactions button, one of the options that you will come up, that you see come up, is raise hand. That is at the bottom of the reaction screen. So if you want to make an intervention, just press on that raise hand, and I will see and call on you. Until I see a hand going up, just make a couple of comments. The ESOPs, James, I didn't work on that, but somebody who worked on that is actually Mark Golding, who had a hand in the drafting of that ESOP legislation, and I think he's still very keen on that. First comment I would like to make to take advantage of the lack of hands going up is to say the thing that really strikes me at any rate in this whole discussion is the role of the trade unions. And to say, obviously, we are having this discussion because the Jamaican trade unions, which are the harbingers of the new Jamaica in 1938, leading to democratic government, the Jamaican trade union movement is now a shadow of itself, because all of these things are happening, and the trade unions are not able to make much of an impact on the situation. I think one of the things that we should be really thinking about is, apart from just government legislation, which obviously is critical, but how do we build a climate of support for such pro-worker legislation, and have the troops, that's the trade union troops, supporting government on the ground? Yeah.
Comment, Leroy. I mean, it's interesting because, again, I've had a kind of, I won't say front seat, but somewhere in the bleachers, view of efforts to unionize a couple of the hotels, huge hotels, because of people I know there. And I mean, a lot of them, they are complete bitterly about the conditions. I mean, I can't explore all of that here, but I can say that it's heartrending, the conditions a lot of the line workers have to undergo. But you say, what about it? No, they are deadly afraid. And there's not enough solidarity among. So once you start to suggest unionization, somebody, the usual old-time house slave mentality, somebody is going to pinch the management and say, that Sammy is doing that, and that person is usually terminated. They're no longer. So it is really a difficult field. I think if we speak with our union people, they will tell you the same thing. It's not for want of trying. Maybe they're not trying as effectively as they should. But that's been my observation.
We unionized the Myrtle Bank Hotel in 1947. One of the bitterest strikes that the TUC fought was that Myrtle Bank strike, but the TUC won. And so unionization of hotels is not something new. It goes back to 1947. What has changed over that time? We unionized. Scully Scott and his Jamaica Maritime Union unionized the what you call it, gas station workers.
Yeah, attendant.
Yeah, right. Is it more difficult to unionize all these other sectors than the gas station workers? The banks, the BITU, supposed to have had union rights in the banks for a couple of decades now. Have they been thrown out? Or what? What is it? What is the situation there?
Leroy Narcis's hand is up.
Yeah, Coromantee Norris, I invite you to make your intervention. Comrade MacDonald.
Yeah, thank you, comrade. And let me start first by thanking and congratulating brother Comrade Walsh for his detailed presentation. Now, one of the first job I did was working at the Ministry of Labor. And Paul, don't say anything there, Paul, please. And in a sense, I worked at the Ministry of Labor for years and saw, as you'd say, some of the first-hand machinations or issues involved in the labor movement. And then later on, I also worked at the Joint Trade Union Research Center as a research officer. I say that to make the point that in the experiences which I saw, like working in all the various unions and so on, in that initial period, you had labor solidarity. In other words, even when the unions that were struggling against each other, like even on the waterfront, the main thing is to make sure no upstart, no outsider don't come in. But like you have whether the TUC, the BITU, the NW, working together in a sense to achieve workers' right. Now, over the years, what has happened now, and what is one of the direct result of the IMF free market liberalization is the emasculation of the working class, of unions, of the labor movement, and so on. So that anything in the future, towards a future PNP government's role, or anything to improve the rights of workers, has to be tied into trying to legally establish a strong national labor relations board. So from the government standpoint, if we're talking about changes, legislative changes in terms of worker participation, amongst other issues, one of the starting points is to reinforce and make it illegal to try to smash workers or stop them from unionizing or, things like that, which hold back the development of union movement and so on. And from the governmental standpoint, we have a city relationship in terms of what role programs such as the IMF liberalization play, so that we're after we going towards literally getting rid of this tied-in system. I see, for example, like with the contract worker system, the courts in America have been acting against some of the powerful corporations who have been using the like Uber. Many corporations are what they do. They use the contract system so the workers out there, you're self-employed, so you don't have to have healthcare or the benefits, you don't have to get overtime or anything like that. You're self-employed. So you have at the governmental level, at the legal, you have to have legal reforms in a serious way, and it's tied in there, and the support those and so on. But in the sense, I'd say even more radical, with sanctions against employers, who breach some of these things and so on, going back to strengthening the National Labor Relations Board, our so-called Ministry of Labor, right? With the board being independent and powerful. That's just my, point of view.
I'm going to call on Maureen Denton next, but before Maureen comes in, I'd like to ask Norris to expand or clarify it more about the Labor Relations Board. What is actually its role, and in what respects this is as falling short, or how we should change that.
Okay. All right. So initially, seeing it first, like at labor, I used to sit in labor negotiations and so on. And at first, the Ministry of Labor was like a referee in the scenario where you never have the rabbit capitalism, which would say literally change the relationship between workers and management, like no. So if you're gonna attack the problem, you have to attack it both in terms of, say, the economic reforms, economic transformation aspect. You have to attack it in terms of your legal reform, and you give the board more powers. So the board, like you have the Joint Trade Union Research Council, which existed, that's where the workers, come together And at that time, they were discussing things like worker participation. No, independent of what the unions themselves are doing, you have to literally know that they have give them a legal cover by having, as I said, a powerful board. So the labor relations board now, you can learn from the experience of Germany, Wall Street and that. Part of the social democratic reforms, the Scandinavian country, Germany, they had what they call the so-called tripartite commission. And the tripartite commission, that's where you have government, private sector, labor. But I think now in that sense, we're have to do now is strengthen, as I said, the governmental aspect of it from our standpoint, since it has gone so far backward now, right? That's one I think we needed to do, so workers will feel more comfortable organizing, coming back together, amongst other things.
All right, okay. Maureen, please make your contribution now. I see O'Neill Lynch. I'm going to come to you next. Maureen Denton. And Norris, can you put on your hand, please? Maureen, I recognize you. Or are you ready, Maureen, or shall I ask somebody else in the meanwhile? Okay, until Maureen gets ready, perhaps I'd call on O'Neill Lynch.
Good afternoon, comrades. I came in just now, but I didn't get to hear the presentation by Comrade Walsh, but I'm very much interested in this labor relation. But when you look at the movement and the forming of the PNP, it came out of this strife between employer and employee. But in today's dispensation, I believe that if you have this elevation of trade unionists becoming almost like an employer, because I have seen where presidents of unions become vice presidents of mega corporations. Presidents of union have become directors of HR. And that is an attempt of union busting when you take the best and the brightest and put them in your HR management. So it kind of killed the efforts of sorry, I have to call it back. It killed unionization. Now, so as a worker, when you see management in bed with union, why form a union? The union are not there today to actively support. They're actively seeking to get salaries. They're not trying to get better work relation. They're actively seeking salary. One of the things that I've noticed with the contract work is that there is the union themselves. And you know what? Because I'm getting emotional about this thing, because all these efforts, the industrial relation laws of Jamaica, they are useless today, because the lawyers are using the law against the worker. It is not about contract. There is no procedure when there are clear breaches of the procedure in the Employment and Redundancy Act. Clear breaches. But seemingly the lawyers have usurped themselves into industrial relations. And that become a bottleneck for unionization. And today, I must admit that the unions, dead. And if I wanted to get involved in a union, I wouldn't even know where to start. I wouldn't know where to start, because I can't just walk into the NWU and say, I want to be a member of the NWU. I don't see them. I can't find them. And if the associations at the universities or workplace, they are not unions. These are just a collection of bodies to only negotiate salaries. That's all it comes down to this day. Only to negotiate salary. If you're the police federation, it is only about salary negotiation, nothing else. If you're the JTA, it's only about salary negotiation, nothing else. Unionism today is totally dead. And that's my 2 cents.
Leroy, perhaps I could ask you as chairman to make O'Neill, who is an accomplished professional, I think a doctor of mathematics, to go a little bit into the background of his specific case without having to call names and not generalize, because there are some union people who are fighting some battles very hard in the work arena. But with your permission, I would, because as I happen to know a little bit more about it, but I think some people might be lost. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, could you just develop a little bit more, please, O'Neill?
Yes, O'Neill. O'Neill,
Yes.
can you come in and respond to Paul?
When you have a contract, you have no choice but to sign these contracts. No choice. The
You're talking
contract has a
about at the
clause
university.
at the university.
Yeah.
No choice but to sign these contracts. The contract has a clause that the university can terminate you in lieu of notice without cause. You want to work. You have done your degrees to be a university lecturer. And when you get this piece of paper, you say, I refuse to sign because this says you can be terminated given 3 months or 6 months notice without reason. And the unions have not sought to fix that. I have no problem with being terminated, but when you go to bed tonight, get up in the morning and say, O'Neill, you are out, that is cause for concern. Now, the next thing is this now. There are procedures in how to treat with termination. You must have natural justice. You must have a fair hearing, have a representative, a trade unionist, a lawyer, whatever. They can just write and put whatever term to a slave by saying you are not fit for purpose, therefore you are dismissed, and then they give you money. 1 year salary, 2 year salary, or buy out the contract. And these are the problems with employment in today. Everything is about the capital, money. They just give you money and you should go. Although you are aggrieved, there is no such place for grievances in this modern era, because as soon as you open your mouth, as Coromante would say, Coromante said it, or it was Comrade Cook, they terminate the contract, or it was Comrade Walsh. As soon as you say something, they are going to terminate the contract. So there is no place for people like us. And some of these people that you see get to high places, in America they have a phrase, you have brown nose. You have stuck your nose way up in people's asses, sorry to say it that way. And they pretend they are professors, but what they have to do to get there, some of us won't do it. Some of us won't kiss any butt to get to the top. So what we have to do as a PMP, I've heard Peter Phillips talk about it, that this thing about contract work, there's nothing wrong with contract work. There's a place for contract work. But if you're going to have contract, it means that you have to get the true salary for a contract worker. A contract worker can't be a permanent worker that can't negotiate their own salary, because in today's dispensation at the university, if you're a contract worker, your salary is negotiated by the University Staff Association. But nonetheless, you're a contract worker. But I don't want to go in detail with the case that I have against the university, because it might prejudice the case. And to be honest, I don't even know too much about how to fight these people, because they have time on their hands. I have only 70 years to live and they have forever to survive, because I'm fighting an institution.
Okay, O'Neill, thank you. I might have to come back to you a little more on one point you raised, but in the meanwhile, Maureen is back with us. Maureen, are you ready to come in at this time?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Maureen, please.
Okay, yeah,
Hold on. Cynthia Cook is up next. I see Cynthia's hand, Maureen, and then Cynthia Cook afterwards.
Okay.
Go on, Maureen.
Yeah, I wanted to, well, first of all, thanks, James, for the presentation. And I agree with all the comments that have been made, but I wanted to shift the discussion a little bit, because I think as we talk about workers' rights and permanent employment, et cetera, we also have to look at the issue of productivity, of energy costs, of security costs, and all of those. I mean, productivity, as far as I know, in terms of just looking at the numbers, that has been declining in Jamaica in terms of the productivity level. So there's a real issue here that if we cannot increase productivity, and in certain instances, if we cannot increase productivity, if we cannot manage the overall cost of production, we have a serious issue, because then it is true that labor is bearing the brunt of it to a certain extent in terms of the wages. But at the same time, there are serious issues. I know, for example, when I was doing the plant at Grace, I mean, it was something that was very, very painful for me, the whole thing about contract working and so forth. And the workers had this phrase, they called it benching. They work for a certain time, and then there's a break, and then they come back on. But I know for a fact that based on all the production costs and everything we had there, you had a real problem in terms of just trying to be able to have people on a permanent basis when there might not be work for them, for example, for every day of the year. So as we talk about workers' rights, et cetera, we have to look at the issue of how do you improve productivity? How do you get Jamaica to be more competitive overall? Because right now, we're not competitive in most of the areas when it comes down to manufacturing and all of that. We're not. That was my comment.
Just a follow-up question, Maureen, before I ask Cynthia to come in. You mentioned productivity, but yet reports are that Jamaicans, when they leave Jamaica and go abroad, they're among the most productive workers. Wherein lies that contradiction, or what is the root cause of that?
Well, I think I think there are several factors. And one factor is, we go back to one of the things, are you getting paid enough for the work, and are you doing the work that you're being paid for? In the US, there is in many areas, well, now it's a different situation, because now you really have a shortage of labor and all of that. But Jamaicans abroad, it is true, whatever job they were doing in general, they knew the rules there, because normally employment is at will. You can be fired anytime or terminated, right? You don't have, it's an employment at will. There's no permanent contract. So you can get a notice that says, okay, we'll terminate you. You might have to, pay some redundancy, but many times you don't have to. You can terminate people depending on the circumstances and all of that. But the rules are quite rigid in terms of work. You have to come to work at a certain time, you leave work at a certain time, and there is less personalization in the whole process, in the sense that, you know, it's not like you can have out here that maybe some people can come work late and they get away with it, and if other people don't come there later. Plus, I think the whole question of hope and also culture separately is very important. People can see a lot in the instances, for example, in the United States, that they can actually get a job, right? They might have to work, or they might have to work 3 jobs, but they have the opportunity to work 3 jobs and to be able to save and plan for the future. You can there's hardly an opportunity out here to work 1 job, much more 2 jobs. So again, what is it you can achieve in the end, I think, is one of the things that push people to really work extremely hard, 2 jobs, 3 jobs to make it there.
Okay. Thank you for the time being. Next in line, Cynthia Cook. Can you unmute yourself, please? Yes, thank you.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
I have been listening, and I just want to play a little devil's advocate here. First of all, the unions, the established ones such as BITU and NWU, what is the size of their portfolio nowadays? You know, do they have many companies as they had in the days that we were talking about? And they still have to pay their employees because those monies came from dues. That's one thing. The next thing is that the unions are mainly associations, as O'Neill mentioned. And these associations are mainly about salary negotiations. And not many of their constituents want to be members of these associations. I remember having to go to every single teacher to get them to sign up to be members of the JTA. They were not interested in being members because it is all about salary negotiations, and whatever benefits the JTA gets for them, everybody will get, whether you're a member or not. I remember people wanting to come to school and sign register whenever they're on a 2-day strike because they want the pay same way. And sometimes the government will say we're not paying for those days. So you have to tell them there's no school, so we're going to sign register. And so people are just not interested. And all they are interested in is what they can get. So because of the complexion of these workers nowadays, they can be used. And a little money here and there can just give them, and they sell out the brethren. So who are we talking to? Who are we dealing with? Can we help them? Can the union help them? Can having a union help these people? The verdict is yours.
Okay. Thank you. It was admittedly, it was I who dragged the union to the center of the discussions, because what you're actually talking about is proposed governmental legislation. But I think the reason why I brought in the unions was because is that such legislation, in my view, would get that much more support if it had the support of the trade unions. We have spent all the time so far talking about contract workers and so on, but I should remind you that another very important part of the discussion has to do with company governance and worker representation on boards. But before I go there, I see Norris wants to make another intervention, and I'll give him the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, just a quick comment here, and I Ms. Cook, was right in the question she posed. But one of the serious issue which goes to the unionization, labor productivity, is the devaluation of the Jamaican dollar over time, where the Jamaican dollar is worth less than 1 cent. So the whole debasement of the national currency has contributed to the alienation of the working class, use that term. People becoming, it's like you're going through the motion to survive. And this is why, like, for Jamaica, have one of the highest rate of brain drain in the world. Because literally, what sense it make? And I'm not saying, I'm not agreeing it, but it's just true, or the system is structured, or the people looking at it. You get educated. But with the salary you're working, first of all, cannot give you the comfortable lifestyle commensurate to, you know, your investment in education and so on. And it's deliberately so. Because America's gained most than any other country from the brain drain. So it's a twofold thing. You have capital, you have money flowing outward, where the IMF allow, you know, through debt and other forms. But you also have human capital, the brain drain, which is flowing outward. So everything come back to the fundamental, what a new government is going to do, a PNP government, to address the different, they're all tied in, whether it's labor productivity, whether it's the value of the dollar, whether it's incentive to work, whether it's the legal system, which has to be changed. It's all tied up in terms of serious structural reform and changes to make people have self-confidence again. Make people see when I work, my life will be improved from that work because my dollar, my money worth something.
Yeah. Paul Burke.
Thank you, Leroy. Leroy, I want to move to the company governance. And I want to say I accept what Maureen said about how we raise productivity. That is another issue, right? I'm not certain that I understand the answers, but I know we've been discussing that for about 30 years, how we raise productivity in Jamaica. But that aside, excuse me, I accept the principle in company governance that employees should be involved at all levels of the company. They can't take control of the company, but certainly must have a meaningful input, right? Because the final decisions are going to be left to the investors. But the workers and the investors, although there's a conflict between labor and capital, have one thing in common. They want to see the company grow. They want to see the company go more profitable, and they want to get better remuneration. Right? So it is not necessarily an adversarial situation. But I believe a lot of public education and examples are going to have to be needed to convince people. Now, I don't believe we have to wait to become government to start to show people how it has worked in other countries and to what advantages, right? There's always a question when I raise this thing in the past about confidentiality, etc., etc., etc. But I believe there are enough enlightened owners of places in Jamaica. When I say there might only be 5%, but that 5% may represent 500 companies, many of them medium size, right? To say, you know, even if it starts with a management meeting, right, where workers are involved in management, because board kind of, well, that kind of like a cliquism thing, you know, that is the owners run the board and that. But I believe if they saw the value of it, then they'd also want workers from that management committee, right, to be involved with the board. Because if you say boss, you know, we can save money doing this way. You know, we can become more productive doing this way. You know, so and so, such and such, right? But I believe workers have a right to know everything. I can tell you my own experience. When workers know what the electricity bill is, as a JPS bill, what you're paying for internet, all of those things, they become more conscious about protecting the entity and promoting the entity. That is my experience. So we try to have full disclosure as much as possible with our workforce in all areas, right? And we involve them in management meetings, etc. And we get many good suggestions. Some we just have to debunk, but many good suggestions from workers at all levels, right? So,
can I say something, Paul? Hello?
yeah, I'm finished.
No, I wanted to say something.
Person has to identify themselves, please.
There's Courtney Spence. Good evening.
Well, with the chairman's permission. Leroy, Courtney
Yes.
Spence wants to make an intervention.
Yes, is that the one with the telephone number?
Yes, that's why your telephone number.
Okay, Courtney, please go ahead.
Okay, Paul, I was thinking some time back is that for people to recognize the importance of business and business to their community.
No, you have to speak a little louder,
Parliament-
Courtney. Courtney, you have to speak a little louder.
Yes. Okay, for people, for the Jamaican citizens to recognize the importance of business and business to the development of their community, couldn't Parliament devolve some of the powers that they have to local parish council, and in doing that, also split the sales tax, that's the GCT. Central government keeps about 8%, and 8% goes to the local polity, where they can decide whether they're going to take 8%, depends on what they need for the development of their councils, right? Or they would, make it be an incentive and say, listen, if you come to Manchester, right, the GCT is like 14% or 12.5%. And so that people would see that the more business that you have with activity you have in a community is the more it will spearhead the development of the community, fixing the roads and the basic infrastructure. So it would take people from looking at saying that's the big man and them just a criminal and thief, but to understand that no, right? Once people are working and producing, the spin-off effect is development and growth. Right? So we need the businessman just as though we need the farmers in the community. But it would take from the top, allowing the community to keep a part of what they earn. So that's just my suggestion.
Courtney, your suggestion actually comes under a different subject that we wish to discuss in not the next time, but the time after, which is to say the subject of what we call local democracy and the devolution of powers from the central government. We want to have a whole discussion by itself on that subject. But Paul has tried to move us on to the company governance and whether or not and to what extent workers should serve on the boards of these companies. He seems to be favoring that that workers can play a positive role, but perhaps he's wavering in some respect.
No, Leroy.
Yes.
I have no reservation. I accept in principle. What I'm saying, we don't have to wait for PNP government to come in power to start identifying the few companies who would understand and appreciate it as a best practice. Yes, policy is always good, but I believe if we were to show the model out and start talking to the GMEA, the PSOJ, the Chamber of Commerce. We might only get 1 or 2 people wanting to do it. But I believe there are sufficient people who are willing to explore how do you improve worker relationship, how do you improve productivity, how do you have a more harmonious company, what are the benefits. I think that in this period it's a good opportunity to start to expose and not wait for government policy. Because although we all want the PNP to come back in office in the shortest possible period, an election can go one of 2 ways. You either win or lose. So I have no reservations about it. I was suggesting that it could start of having workers on a management committee because I believe that is far more palatable to many people willing to explore worker participation than to have them on a board one jump.
I agree with you, Paul, that the discussion does not need to wait, but I assume that what you're saying is that provided the party leadership accepts our recommendation, then the party leadership will start these discussions. We were not putting so much emphasis initially on discussions with the manufacturers and so on, but I would support your view that discussions with the manufacturers and the employers should be carried through. But we were proposing even before then that the discussion start with trade unions. So you know, if we can discover where the trade unions are, somebody said they're not sure if they still have trade unions. But that's such trade unions as there are that which seek to have the government, not the government, the PNP leadership, hopefully accepting these proposals, would then move to have discussions with trade unions and also with employers' organizations. I am fully in support of that. I'm fully in support of that. What about the proposal for further study of these Northern European models that have existed for the last 50 years or so? Who should carry out those studies?
Leroy, can I intervene again? The trade unions are given, and also any policy should have incentives more than sanctions. So one of the things with the ESOP, just like cooperatives do not pay tax on profits, right? Something has to be, a carrot has to be given, apart from the convincing people why I should have someone on my board, which I've been accustomed to as a private club for many years, being elected by shareholders. It is a journey, but I agree with you. It is one of the things with our symposium. We need to convince the party of its benefits so that the discussions, hopefully they'll accept it, can commence even before you come into office. Leroy, I will say one thing, and I say it here. If it is to become mandatory at the outset, I see resistance from within the PNP. Because how the PNP gets its funding is primarily from the business sector. And the business sector feel this is part again without appreciating the policy, what are the benefits of the policies, that this is going to be a mandatory structure that PNP coming to tell you who must sit on your board. It can backfire on any electoral chances you have. And some things you have to go not by, I don't use the word coercion, but by persuasion. And I believe there are enough businesses who, for a start, who can be persuaded about the benefits of company governance, worker participation. I really do.
But Paul, the point you just made is precisely the reason why we have said that what we need to do is to make some changes within the party at the same time as we are putting forward these governmental proposals, because both of them are linked. That unless that if we don't have a party of the type that that depends on its members and that depends for financial support on outsiders, then obviously there is no guarantee that it will accept the proposals, such a program that would be in favor of the have-nots of the
And
strength.
Leroy, that's a discussion we need to have openly
Yes.
another fora. I'm just cautioning you what I know of PNP, its candidates. It would not
Yes.
want to do anything that could have a fundamental disconnection with business class and private class. I'm just telling you the realities. And I agree with you, the PNP has to become far more self-reliant and self-financing. Will that happen in 2 years? I don't think so.
But
Okay.
Comrade Burke, this shouldn't be the PNP effort. Comrade Cook? Why it should be the PNP effort? The PNP has the NWU. The NWU can lead this charge and get the PNP out of the loop. So the PNP can say the NWU is on a frolic of their own, which is the union. I'm just using because the NWU is not the PNP. Is that correct?
O'Neill. In case you don't know, I am not very closely in touch with the inner workings of the PNP in these days. So I am not sure how close the relationship is between the PNP and the National Workers Union. Plus, I think that there might be other unions that have some kind of relationship with the PNP, including the University and Allied Workers Union and some others. So, Paul, can you speak to the relationship between the PNP and these unions at this time?
On paper, the NW is still affiliated to the People's National Party. But allow me to straight, O'Neill, to say that the NW is on a frolic of its own and to leave them out there would be the most opportunistic position. And when people ask the PNP, what is your position on the matter? Oh, that's the NW position. I don't believe that would be so unethical and unprincipled.
No, I'm just using that to say that the NWU should really start.
But and Leroy, yes, there is not a structured relationship, but a close working relationship with the UAW, with UTAS, with a number of unions. But it needs to be structured. It needs to be structured.
But there is something I also wanted to ask O'Neill. You made mention of the role of lawyers, but lawyers really on the side of the companies. What I wanted to ask is, are there no pro-labor lawyers in Jamaica today? There used to be quite a few at one time.
Well, I can't speak that there are pro-labor lawyers, but the lawyers are just there on the side of the company.
Sorry, O'Neill, let me say you. The companies are hiring QCs, right, to defend their causes. The average worker can't afford a 15-year-old lawyer with experience. The average worker is going to have somebody with 5 years experience and 10 years experience. Not that you don't have some good lawyers with under 10 years experience, but it's QCs.
I'm not talking about individual workers employing lawyers. I'm talking about unions. Certainly the unions, it is for the unions as part of their defensive, whether offensive or defensive mechanism to mobilize lawyers to their cause and to the cause of the defense of their workers.
Right, but
or are there so few lawyers so minded that Yeah. You know, there was a certain
Maureen wanted to say something, Leroy. Maureen wanted to say something.
Maureen. Yeah, Maureen.
No, I was going to say, I don't think it's not necessarily a question whether they're not lawyers defending these. You'd have to go to the law. I mean, when somebody like the university writes a contract like that, or any of the companies write a contract, those contracts are in keeping with the law. Whether they're fair or not fair, they're in keeping with the law. And therefore, I think that's one of the reasons O'Neill is saying you get a contract to sign, right? And I don't know anything about it, the case or anything like that. But you get a contract to sign. When you look at the contract, you know there are fundamental issues in it from the start, because you see something that says I can essentially terminate you at convenience. But because you want a job and you can't negotiate otherwise, you accept the contract like that. And once you accept the contract like that, then it does mean they can terminate you at convenience. So I'm saying it would require fundamental changes in the law in order to address some of the things that are being asked here. But to do some of the changes in the law, you also need to make sure the other parts of the country are working the way they're supposed to be working, right? The thing has to be integrated. You can't have crime at the level it is and everybody have to spend a significant portion of all their earnings on security and expect that we can be as competitive as another country that doesn't have those sort of levels of crime and have to pay so much on security. We have a set of workers that a lot of times are not educated, right? They have basic skill, but they're not educated. How are we going to compete if we're not addressing those fundamental issues? We can't change the laws until we're blue. Our workers will not be able to earn more on a consistent basis because in certain instances, the tourism is a different argument. And again, even on tourism, I say it goes towards government policy and making changes there. But oftentimes we're just not competitive at all. And I don't know how we're going to grow if we're not, the country can't grow, the economy cannot really truly grow unless some of these fundamental things are addressed. Can't happen.
You're actually raising two separate issues, Maureen. One is the issue of productivity and so on, and the other is the issue of the law. And that I think what you're actually saying is that you agree that the government needs to make some important changes to the laws that govern labor and labor and capital relationship generally, and that would mean that our party, the PNP, if it is so minded, would then need from now to have a person or a committee really researching and looking into these laws to see which laws need to be changed and you know what areas of these laws need changing and what are the proposals for change. We are put forward certain suggestions, and we would prefer if they start out with our suggestions and say, well, we don't think it can work exactly like that, but we would propose that we do it this way. This is how I would see that it would work.
Right, and if I may respond, Comrade Chair, that
Yeah.
I agree with you, but I guess the big point I'm making is that those things cannot be done in a vacuum, is what I'm saying. You can't change certain laws, and because you put the laws, because as we say, we're living in a global economy. Companies can move and go wherever it is they want to go. We have seen persons who said they were going to build additional hotels here. And because of the whole situation, etc., they've said, no, you know what? I can build it in the Dom Rep at a cheaper cost, less bureaucracy, etc. So unless we take a holistic approach to how we're really going to transform this economy and make it better for our people and for our workers, etc. It can't happen. Changing the law to say you can't have contract workers just simply mean that, you know, perhaps people will just automate certain more automation in there. Then you don't have to have those workers any at all, which at some point, that's where we'll go.
May I say something? Well, yes. Well, I'm sure I may, and I will say something that on the one hand, we have been lamenting what seems to be the toothlessness of the union movement today. But to the extent that the labor management relations are less aggressive than they were at one time, might actually be an opportunity for us to start a discussion involving both labor and management, where we look at the economics of the thing and look at the mutual benefits that can come from, you know, proper relationship between workers and management within the company. And that this discussion we're talking about concerning company governance be one that is cast within that broader light to see that how do we consolidate the matter, how do we consolidate the good relations which have been existing between labor and management, and how do we start off from there to give workers a better understanding of what it means for a company to be successful, and for companies to have a better understanding of the extent to which the involvement of workers in the governance of their company would be of mutual benefit on all sides.
And I agree with you there. And I think to go back to the question you raised as to who will do the research, because I think it's important to bring in the examples from different countries, because we are a country that, you know, we just look abroad and we see what somebody's doing over there and we try to copy it and we try to throw it in. So I think it is important to show that companies have not failed. Their confidential information have not been violated or thrown out there simply because they have workers on their board. And as a matter of fact, it has been to the company's benefit. So I do think we need to gather this information, these examples, and put them together to use when the counter arguments come, to have them to say, no, let's look at Germany, let's look at Finland, let's look at some of these places and see how they have handled it.
There was a time when the party had a research officer. I'm not sure if they still have a person with that title, but certainly the University of the West Indies is much stronger now than it was 50 years ago. And I'm sure it will be easier to make contact with persons or departments at the University of the West Indies. That they should point their research, not to point their research, but that it could assist us in pointing our research or helping us in clarifying you know, who might have interest in this area and who we might work with on this research in historical situation and present situation in Northwestern Europe.
Yeah, because I think the trade unions isn't one of the part of the trade union have some research part to it or whatever it is. I mean, this should be something that our trade unions have looked at or should be looking at in terms of going in there to fight for certain rights of workers, etc. That part of the argument, that part of the arsenal is to look at what is there. So it would be good to check with, like, what do they call, the joint trade union
research.
The Joint Trade and Research Development Council. That was the name at the time when I was there.
I think between that Joint Trade Union Research Development Council and the Hugh Lawson Shearer, whatever they call it, Institute at the University of the West Indies, that is where we should start.
Yeah, right. Because they should be doing some of that work. Yeah.
That we should make contact with those, you know, and let them know that we are interested in this area.
Who is we?
Leroy, could I comment just on the point here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Norris.
Yeah. So the point of Maureen was raising it's a very critical area. What you were saying to I think other people. The question is, what is happening with the JTRC? Because like I remember I was checking from to see if I could get some documents there, where you know, and the feedback I got is not very, very active. Now, what the Joint Trade Union Center used to do, right? Because I say I was an associate research officer there at one time. It literally was able to coordinate the work of all the unions in respect of their political affiliation or support. It was carrying out work education. For example, I was editor of the NW newspaper, but I was also training BIT workers in terms of say how to gather news, how to, you know, their own political education work inside the union and so on. So as you said, Leroy, the question is this: we need to find out or get to, for example, both the Lawson Shearer Center and also find out what exactly is happening with the Joint Trade Union Research Development Council. And I think we should probably start there before, and I take Paul's point. But, you know, we'd probably have to start there before we even start having a discussion with management or so on, you know, because it's going to be in their interest to have something like this working, because they would see, and, you know, and Maureen pointed about labor productivity is a critical key point. But how do you get workers to have a vested interest? That is that issue we're struggling at, you know, so that they see their stake is in making the company successful and so on, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's my 2 cents on it. Well, 1 cent cut the dollar devalue.
I'm trying to figure whether it should be 1 cent or 2 cents.
0.5.
Yes. Paul, I didn't get a copy of the agenda which was put up on the screen earlier, so I am not sure where we are exactly as far as the total agenda for this evening is concerned. Discussion 30 minutes. Next on the Progressive Manifest. Okay. All right. Thank you, Alicia.
Oh, we're at 7 minutes to 9.
Yes. All right. Well, I don't know. I don't see any other participant chomping at the bit to come in on this, but perhaps it is because we have almost exhausted the time that we had allocated for our discussion. So I think the discussion has been useful. Discussion has been useful, and certainly I think I would believe that the next step would be for whoever is the person or persons that has a labor responsibility within the present PNP leadership to initiate contacts with these trade union institutes or institutions that we have just recently mentioned, with a view to initiating the discussions that we are, well, first of all, to get a clearer picture on the practice in the Northwestern European countries who we think are possible role models, and to get the views of the union leadership, and to see how we would proceed with those discussions. Next up on our agenda, on our series of discussions
Sorry,
on
can I
the
say something just before you go
yes,
on?
Maureen, please. I don't want to cut you off. Please.
No, and I'll say it quickly because we're running out of time. But you've just said some things that, and I'd said before, who are we talking about? We, because we just said a while ago, perhaps we can get the person in the party who is in charge of labor, or to go and try to get this information. But first, if we go that route, one would have to get buy-in from the party that they are in fact interested in going the route. I thought what we were saying is that we, through whatever means we have, would do some of that independent research so that we could present it either to business, as we said, we don't necessarily have to wait until the PNP go in government, or wherever we want to present it.
Yes, Maureen, I yield my position to your superior presentation. I agree with what you're saying.
We can do
okay.
both. We can do both.
Paul? Paul, are you speaking?
No,
Or do you
I
wish
was saying, Leroy, I know you're in your closing remarks, that we could do both simultaneously.
Okay, point taken. Yes. Next up on the Progressive Manifesto series is a discussion on income tax reform and wealth inequality. Two subjects that relate: income tax reform and wealth inequality, and that is scheduled for Wednesday, the 13th of April. So make a note of that. I'm sure we will be contacting you in the meanwhile. Bring your ideas to the table: income tax reform and wealth inequality. We will let you know what our proposals are, but certainly we are sure that our proposals can be strengthened or improved by whatever inputs you have to make at that discussion on the 13th of April. So I want to again thank James Walsh for his presentation, and thank all the members who came on and contributed to this discussion. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you. And good night, comrades.
Good night, comrades.
Useful discussion. Hope we can build on it.
Good night, everybody.
All right. Good night, comrades.
Thanks for listening. I really hope we can build on this.
Yes, I hope so. It was a fruitful discussion. Very good discussion.
And the issues of productivity we have to look at. And I think that's one of the things we have to do. We have to look closely now at the operation, the process. What is it that's driving these processes of making workers, precariously employed? Who benefits? Yes, because here is there any growth coming from this thing? Yes, we are improving the profitability, but what is the benefit? Is it that the profitability is accruing to a minority of billionaires? Are the workers in the banks and in the hotels and so on who are put on these contracts in the interest of productivity?
Right.
Where does the benefit of that productivity accrue? Is it in growth of the national economy in terms of what the Americans would call well-paid jobs? Or is it growth of informal employment and, increasing inequality. These are some of the issues I think
Exactly.
we as a movement and as a party have to look at very closely. Requires, detailed analysis.
Mhm.
And I think we have to once more re-inject ourselves in the movement, the international movement of, the international progressive movement, and explore the thinking and share the thinking of that. One of the problems I've found in Jamaica is that there doesn't seem to be much progressive thought anymore.
Yeah.
Comrade
Yeah.
Cook, before you close, what is gonna be the step to get these ideas and well structuring it, no more progressive thought?
Mhm.
How are we gonna get these ideas which have been discussed out to the wider public and so on? I mean, we have had some very good forums, some very good discussion, but
Right.
what's the next step?
Mhm.
Is there a strategy now to have the material disseminated to the wider society?
Mhm.
There are two aspects of that, Norris.
Mhm.
One is that Paul assures me that all of these discussions that we have been having have been recorded.
Mhm.
So we'll have record what you call it, videos, etc. of these things, but also that we're working towards a meeting with the party leadership sometime hopefully in June,
Mhm.
where we can make a presentation of our ideas on these things to the leadership of the party. That is Paul's proposal. I don't know. Well, that hasn't, the,
Approved now.
the final details of that haven't been worked out yet, apparently, but that is a general, where we're moving.
How about mobilizing public opinion before that?
Yeah.
Well,
Leroy, I think
I mean,
you need
it's
to have a
simply.
strategy- I think you
Hello?
need to have a strategy meeting. Leroy, Norris' point is real.
Yeah.
Planning meetings with the vision committee, with the party's officers group, hopefully to put out a publication, both physical and
Mhm.
and electronic.
Yes.
The annual REC is going on to conference,
Yes.
right? We're going to need some resources, of course, to get these things done. But I don't believe we can afford just to be incestuous, talking to us,
Yes.
and it doesn't go any further.
I agree. And
Right.
Paul, the tradition of the PNPYO has never been that it has to wait until the party is doing certain things for
Exactly.
it to think there's reason to act.
Right.
And I think we go before this committee, it's going to take months and next year and whatever it is, it has to be parallel.
Yes, exactly. I agreed, Maury.
Yeah, it has to be both ways. Because we're just talking, and it's good, the discussion among ourselves is great, but it really needs to be broadened.
Action now.
Yeah.
Right, Comrade Cook?
I have signed off, Norris, so anything I say now is completely off the record.
Okay.
But I see to the top left-hand column, left-hand of my screen, I see live on YouTube. So apparently,
you should be on live yourself then.
I see, will not be off the record.
That's right. That's right. You're absolutely right. I forgot about that. I keep thinking it's just us talking here, you know.
Yeah, but overall, it's a very, very great discussion, you know. Very, very good, and it's needed. And I think, as I said before, we need to disseminate, get other people involved also, you know. I think these forums have been tremendously good. Without a doubt. Comrade Walsh was spot on, you know. All the comrades, your presentation, Comrade Maureen Denton presentation, you know, all those presentations, Comrade Francis.
And the one on agriculture. I mean,
yes.
I thought, I just think like Walsh, James have his group there and so forth. I think if he's having a group thing and he can bring together some people up there, that, you know, we pick one of these topics or whatever it is and go and talk to them and get people's feedback. I think that's all we need to do. We need to be on the ground and just moving around with some of this discussion.
I saw Ronnie Tweets write an article in which he mentioned, he don't mention this thing, but he mentioned it was Maureen presentation, education, and so on, right? So therefore, the people want to engage them, you know, and that's what I'm talking about to, you know, like yourself, Comrade Cook, probably writing articles to the media about some of these things, other Comrade volunteering to write articles to the media, going on radio, if possible, to discuss some of these ideas, you know, just start get it going, you know, juke
And
them.
I just read recently in the last few days in one of the newspapers a letter from Hamati. I suppose it is Hamati from down in Westmoreland or wherever.
Freddie, yeah.
Fred Hamati, where he was talking about the necessity for getting access to our beaches again, and specifically that we need easements down to the beach that people can use. So I don't know if it is an independent proposal of his, or if it has anything to do with coming from our discussion.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
But from what Maureen, you will probably recall that the very first document that I sent out suggested that our first thing should be to get people of like mind as ourselves in special areas that we discuss these things with. So I think, you know, we have always been on the same wavelength. You know, as ours.
And as I think where we are now, that's we really have to shift our this relationship and expand it a bit, because even sometimes you hear back from people who listen in to some of the discussions, and I mean they might not say anything, but people are really interested and really find the discussions very good. So it needs to move around. You take the thing like the thing on whether you should have a seat on the board. It's good, you know, get some people together, talk to them and say, what are your thoughts on that? Would you want to sit on the board or not? You know?
Maureen, let me tell you what I am speaking specifically within the People's Party. They expect I don't.
Oh, I thought.
Can YouTube be ended now?
Oh, Jesus. Is that my other How do I end it from?
I still see an orange button at the top of my screen on the left
I'm
saying
no longer live. I'm co-host. Can I end it from my phone or your phone?
I'm not certain. I'm trying.
I think we have to end the platform. But really, I think that is subversive. I just that within the people.
Now that we are old, Paul, we have given up subversiveness.
I love that.
Is Angela still on? Angela must be off that she's not commenting on that age comment.
Angela's been defanged by Paul.
Within the People's Party, people expect policy to emanate from the top. They are looking for the leaders, the bigger heads. They have become docile. I don't like the word impotent, but it is applicable to many of them, right? You know, really, it is pathetic that if the very same things were being said, or less than what we're saying, by some of the spokespersons, you know, a bigger audience. And I'm not worried about the size of the audience, quite frankly. Although I believe we must make the symposium successful. We must have some meetings with the leadership. And Maureen, I'm on one-on-one with you. We have to act simultaneously. Parallel, you say, I say simultaneously. I think if we invite, after we have made the presentation to the party, if we said, look, man, we want to invite for a discussion on these policies, you'll have more people on the GMEA turning up. I'm a member of the GMEA, and I tell you, more people on the GMEA, you'll have at least 20, 30, 40 people on the GMEA turning up. I can't take from the private sector organization from Jamaica, but I'm sure they'll turn up to the Chamber of Commerce, the Jamaica Employers Federation would turn up. And of course, we should go to the unions before. There's a point of respect to try and get them on board, the unions before. But I believe we have to develop an action plan. I think, Leroy, it's time to develop a strategy. How do we expand our outreach of the progressive agenda?
Yes. Yes.
Leroy, I
Leroy,
think Mikey McDonald has his hand up.
And just one thing before, because I was actually driving, just one thing before, I had forgotten to say with corporate governance, and I know the discussion is over, but what has happened, is that there is a senior management group in all of these institutions who is a buffer between the owners and the contract workers. And really the senior management group, I don't want to say they have sold out, but they are paid so well that most of them, that they operate on the total behest of their owners. And they are part of a suppressive group of contract workers. Trust me.
Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Are you
hearing
hearing me? Yeah. Yeah, I would like to comment Jim was in a very fine presentation. I kind of came in a little late, but I've been listening. I think there's been a very good discourse and a lot of ideas and so on. But as somebody else said earlier, we need action now. Taking things further and having more influence in the party in terms of our thinking and ideas and so on, So it has been a very good discussion.
I think we all agree that we need to now broaden the thing. One of the things in this particular subject, certainly the workers, right? We should maybe have a session with the union, right? Some union leaders and delegates specifically. We could have a session with them because we have been kind of hard on them to say, boy, well, Leroy was saying, we unionized Myrtle Bank and, Scully unionized the gas station attendants and so on and these. But it would be good, since none of us have the experience that they have had, to hear their side of the story in terms of what has been their experience, what strategies have they employed, and where they hope to go.
And it should be clear, James, that any such discussion should include the BITU.
Yes.
And it should include the what do you call it, civil service. All of those non-political, well, not just the BITU, but also non-politically affiliated unions.
The unions and employers association.
Well, I don't know if we should, I think we should, it is two separate sets of discussions, G. I think one with the union or unions. I think another one with the employers, and then after those initial discussions, then perhaps with both of them together.
Yeah.
But that's probably further, much further down the line, when at a time when the party will have taken a position closer to ours, hopefully, on these matters. But I agree.